welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into Operation Paperclip.
Okay.
This whole program that brought Nazi scientists over to America after World War II.
Right.
And you've given us this great Wondery podcast called Operation Paperclip, America's Secret Nazi Scientists to dive into.
Yeah,
So this is going to be interesting.
definitely. It's a really fascinating but also controversial chapter in history.
Yeah, for sure.
You really have to think about the context of the time, right?
Okay.
It's 1945, World War II is finally over in Europe, but tensions are already rising between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Oh, wow. So it's like they went straight from one thing to the next.
Exactly. It's the beginning of the Cold War, and both sides are looking for any advantage they can get.
Oh, I see.
And technology is a huge part of that.
Right.
German scientists had expertise that both the U.S. and the Soviets desperately wanted.
That makes sense.
So they become these really valuable assets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
They're caught in this tug of war between these two superpowers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So then we have Major Robert B. Staver in London, right?
Yes.
And he's like totally obsessed with the V-2 rocket.
Oh, yeah. The V-2 was a game changer.
It sounds terrifying.
It really was. I mean, it was the world's first long-range ballistic missile. Imagine the kind of fear that struck into people's hearts.
I can only imagine.
It was a precursor to the rockets we use today to launch satellites and people into space.
Wow. It's kind of crazy to think about how something so destructive could lead to something like space exploration.
Yeah, it really is.
So Staver comes across this list while he's in London, right?
Yeah, he finds a list of 15,000 German scientists and over 1,000 Nazi research facilities.
Whoa.
It was partially destroyed, like someone had tried to flush it down a toilet at a German university.
Seriously, a toilet.
Yep. But luckily for Staver, the Nazis were meticulous record keepers, so he was able to piece a lot of it back together.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, you could say that.
Their attention to detail ends up helping the very country they were fighting against.
It's like something out of a spy movie.
Total twist. So instead of, celebrating the end of the war,
Right.
Staver immediately jumps into another mission.
Okay.
He goes to Germany to find V-2 rocket parts and blueprints.
He's on the hunt for that technology.
Yes. And that leads him to the Nordhausen concentration camp.
Nordhausen. It's a stark reminder of the dark side of these technological advancements.
Yeah.
I mean, the Nazis used slave labor from concentration camps like Nordhausen to build these weapons.
Right.
Thousands of prisoners died under horrific conditions, all in the name of advancing Nazi technology.
It's just awful.
It really is a dark chapter in human history.
Okay, so Staver is at Nordhausen.
Yeah.
And that's where he meets Wernher von Braun, right?
Yes, von Braun was a leading scientist in the V-2 program.
And a Nazi, right?
Yes, a high-ranking one. In fact,
Wow.
Staver was faced with a huge dilemma.
I bet.
Does he recruit this brilliant scientist who is instrumental in developing the V-2?
Oh, so it's like...
Or does he risk letting him fall into Soviet hands?
Right.
It was a moral tightrope walk for sure.
It sounds like the beginning of a really slippery slope.
It definitely was. It's the start of Operation Paperclip, and the ethical questions just get more complicated from there.
Yeah, I mean, how do you justify bringing Nazi scientists to America?
Well, that's exactly what they had to figure out.
Right?
The U.S. argued that they needed these scientists to stay ahead of the Soviets in the technology race.
Okay, I can see that argument.
And also to prevent them from sharing their knowledge with other countries who might be hostile to the U.S.
Yeah, makes sense.
But the story they told the public was a little different.
Oh, how so?
They downplayed the Nazi connections, portraying these scientists as good Nazis who were forced to work for the regime.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, they really tried to control the narrative and shape public perception.
Wow. So von Braun, a former, high-ranking Nazi, transitions to life in America.
Yep, he goes from Fort Bliss, Texas, to Huntsville, Alabama. He ends up playing a key role in the development of America's missile program.
Wow.
And eventually, the space race.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's a really strange turn of events when you think about it.
Definitely.
A former Nazi scientist ends up being instrumental in launching America into the space age.
So von Braun's past, his involvement with the Nazis.
Yeah.
Do you think that influenced his work in the U.S. in any way?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to wonder if there was any internal conflict for him.
Right.
Using knowledge gained under such horrific circumstances to fuel this new chapter of his life.
Right. Like, how do you just compartmentalize something like that?
It's hard to fathom, isn't it?
It feels very surreal, this whole story.
Yeah, it's like something out of a movie.
a former Nazi scientist becomes this, like, American hero, right?
Right. He was the face of America's space program for a while.
And he even received the Medal of Science and Engineering shortly before his death in 1977.
Yeah, and for a long time, his past remained largely hidden from public view.
It's crazy how long it took for the truth to come out.
Well, it all started to unravel in 1985 when CNN reporter Linda Hunt exposed von Braun's deep involvement with the Nazi regime.
It's like history had to be rewritten.
In a way, it did.
It makes you wonder if von Braun was the only one with a hidden past, right?
Unfortunately, he was just one of many.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then in 1998, millions of pages of government records,
Right.
they were declassified. And
Right.
this really opened up a can of worms,
Yeah.
showing just how deep some of these Nazi scientists were involved in war crimes,
Right.
and that the U.S. government had been actively trying to cover it all up.
It makes you think about the choices they made back then. Like,
Yeah.
what were they thinking?
It really forces us to confront
Yeah.
some uncomfortable truths about our history.
Mhm.
I mean, was national security more important than justice?
That's a tough question.
It is, and it's one that historians and ethicists are still debating today.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
You know, that the U.S. government would protect these scientists, knowing what they had done.
Right.
It's disturbing.
It is.
What I find really troubling is that some of these scientists,
Yeah.
they weren't just like passive members of the Nazi regime.
No, absolutely not.
They were actively involved in some horrific crimes.
Yes. Some of them were directly involved in medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners.
Oh my gosh.
It's truly horrifying.
It's hard to even imagine.
Take Theodor Benzinger, for example.
Okay.
He was a Nazi doctor who conducted these awful experiments on prisoners,
What kind of experiments?
exposing them to extreme temperatures,
Oh gosh.
just torturous conditions.
That's awful.
And get this, when he died in 1999,
Yeah.
his obituary in the New York Times,
Okay.
it made him sound like this respected scientist.
Oh,
There was no mention of his Nazi past at all.
It's like they just erased that part of his life.
Exactly. It's shocking.
It really is.
That someone who was complicit in such atrocities could be portrayed in such a positive light.
It doesn't seem right.
Not at all.
And it wasn't just Benzinger, right?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
Hubertus Strahold, he was a physiologist involved in Operation Paperclip.
Okay.
He oversaw experiments where they used low-pressure chambers and freezing water on prisoners
Oh my God.
to simulate high-altitude conditions.
Like they were using these people as guinea pigs.
Exactly.
It's just inhumane.
It is, and there was even an award named after Strahold.
Really?
Yeah, it was given to top aviation researchers.
Wow.
And they didn't revoke it until 2013 when his Nazi past really came to light.
So it seems like these weren't just isolated incidents.
Yeah.
It was like a pattern.
Yeah, a disturbing pattern.
It makes you wonder how many other scientists involved in Operation Paperclip
Yeah.
might have had similar skeletons in their closets.
It's unsettling to think about
It is.
because it points to a systemic issue where the U.S. government was willing to overlook these scientists' pasts
yeah.
in exchange for their knowledge.
For their expertise, yeah. How do you think the public would have reacted if they had known the truth about these scientists all along?
That's a really good question.
Would they have still been celebrated as heroes?
Hard to say, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
What we do know is that for years,
Yeah.
the government actively tried to protect these scientists
Right.
from any kind of scrutiny or accountability.
It's like they were trying to rewrite history.
Yeah, and in a way, they did.
And that brings us to the lasting impact of Operation Paperclip.
Right.
Looking back now, knowing what we know,
Yeah.
how should we view this program?
It's a complicated question
Yes.
with no easy answers.
Yeah, it's messy.
It is.
So some people would say that the technological advancements,
Right.
that these scientists helped to achieve,
Yeah.
that those outweigh the moral compromises that were made.
Right. The ends justify the means argument.
Yeah.
But others would say that harboring war criminals,
Right.
regardless of their contributions,
Yeah.
is just fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. That it goes against our values.
Exactly.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
It's a real dilemma.
It is.
You have these incredible scientific achievements that came out of Operation Paperclip,
Right.
but they're built on this foundation of suffering and injustice.
It's hard to separate the two.
It really is.
Yeah, it really shows you those dilemmas they were facing back then.
Right.
Like on the one hand, these scientists played a big role in,
Yeah.
advancing rocketry and space exploration.
Right.
They help to shape our understanding of the universe.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, it's like,
Yeah.
how can we ignore the,
Yeah.
exploitation and suffering that kind of fueled all of that?
It raises a big question.
Yeah.
Can we really separate scientific progress from the ethics of how that knowledge was obtained?
That's a tough one.
It is. Can we celebrate the achievements while also acknowledging the human cost?
Yeah,
It's a question we're still grappling with today, I think.
I think so too. And it's not just limited to Operation Paperclip, right?
Absolutely not. We see these same ethical questions popping up with new technologies all the time.
Like what?
Like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, all these advancements that have the potential to be incredibly beneficial,
Right.
but also carry significant risks.
So it's like we're constantly trying to find that balance.
Exactly, the balance between progress and responsibility.
Yeah. So looking back at Operation Paperclip,
Yeah.
what lessons can we learn from all of this?
Well, I think transparency is key.
Okay.
We need to be honest about our history,
Even the ugly parts.
especially the ugly parts. We can't just sweep things under the rug and pretend they didn't happen.
And what about accountability?
Accountability is crucial. When individuals or institutions violate ethical principles, they need to be held responsible for their actions.
So it's not enough to just acknowledge the past. We have to learn from it and make sure those mistakes aren't repeated.
Exactly.
And I think it also highlights the importance of critical thinking, right?
Absolutely. We can't just blindly accept information at face value.
Especially when it comes from people in positions of power.
Right. We need to question motives, dig deeper, demand evidence.
Do our own research.
Exactly. Operation Paperclip is a perfect example of how easily narratives can be manipulated,
Yeah.
even when the stakes are incredibly high.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Operation Paperclip,
Yeah.
I'm kind of left with this one thought.
Well-
What responsibility do we have as individuals
Right.
to ensure that the pursuit of knowledge and progress aligns with our ethical values?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. It's a lot to think about.
It really is. Operation Paperclip shows us that history is full of these moral complexities.
Yeah.
There are rarely easy answers.
And we have to be willing to engage with those complexities.
Exactly. We need to learn from the past, have these tough conversations, and work towards creating a future where scientific advancement goes hand in hand with ethical responsibility.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for diving into this with me. This was a fascinating look into Operation Paperclip.
It was my pleasure.